You ever get sued for something so dumb, it actually makes you laugh out loud? That was me, standing in my driveway, holding a thick manila envelope with the words "summons to appear in civil court" printed across the top. The sender: Deborah Whitmore, president of the Rosemeadow Heights HOA. And the reason? I'm suing you for violating HOA covenants by running an unauthorized business and parking a commercial vehicle in a residential neighborhood, she said, arms crossed, lips pursed like she just licked a lemon. I stared at her deadpan. Deborah, I don't live in your neighborhood. You're adjacent, she snapped, jabbing her acrylic-nailed finger toward my house. You're within visual proximity. That affects our property values. You can't just do whatever you want while being visible to residents of Rosemeadow. I live on Maple Hollow Drive. It's a county road. My house was built in the 70s, long before Rosemeadow Heights became a thing. Their HOA boundary ends 2 blocks up. I run a small mobile mechanic business out of my garage, just me, my tools, and a decayed van. I don't block traffic. I don't make noise. I help my neighbors. And I've never had a single complaint until Deborah Whitmore spotted my van from her morning walk route and decided I was a threat to her paper kingdom. Name's Silas Peterson, by the way. Just a regular guy with a wrench, a mortgage, and about zero tolerance for power-hungry HOAs. 3 days after her little sidewalk tantrum, I got the summons. Deborah had filed a civil suit claiming I was a disruptive commercial enterprise operating within the visual jurisdiction of Rosemeadow Heights. I looked it up. That's not a thing. But that didn't stop her from attaching a bunch of blurry photos of my van and a printout of some made-up map. She drew with a highlighter and a ruler, extending the HOA boundary to include sightline-adjacent properties. I called my neighbor Dennis, who's an actual real estate attorney. She's trying to hit you with a nuisance suit, he said. It's garbage, but she's hoping you'll fold or settle. I didn't fold. I filed a countersuit. See, what Deborah didn't realize was that I had already been documenting her for weeks. Ever since she started harassing the retired couple across the street over their flowerbed colors, I'd installed a small front yard cam. I had footage of her trespassing, threatening letters she left in mailboxes without postage, federal offense. By the way, and most importantly, I had a copy of the original HOA charter from the county clerk's office. Turns out, Rosemeadow Heights was incorporated improperly 15 years ago. The original filing never got finalized with the county zoning board. It had been operating in a legal gray zone all this time and no one noticed. Until now. So when I walked into small claims court, Deborah was already there with her stack of fake maps and printouts, dressed like she was heading to a PTA meeting from 1992. She didn't even glance at me. The judge asked her to present her case. She launched into a 10-minute rant about community standards and aesthetic compliance. Then it was my turn. I stood up, handed the judge my evidence packet and said, "Your Honor, not only do I not live in this woman's HOA, but the HOA itself shouldn't legally exist." You could have heard a pin drop. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Come again." I flipped to the county's stamped record. Rosemeadow Heights filed articles of incorporation in 2009, but they never completed the zoning certification. That makes their entire charter invalid. Every fine they've issued, every enforcement action, they're all unenforceable. Deborah's face turned the color of expired yogurt. The judge took a long pause, then said, "I'll need to verify this with the county clerk. We'll reconvene in 72 hours. And just like that, her smug little lawsuit turned into a full-blown legal meltdown. She'd poked the wrong bear, and I brought receipts. 3 days later, I walked into the courtroom wearing my work boots and a clean collared shirt. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I'd been underneath a 2003 Ford Ranger that morning replacing a leaking fuel filter, and I wasn't about to show up covered in grime. Deborah was already seated, tapping her pen against a legal pad like she expected to cross-examine the entire county. Next to her sat a man in a slate gray blazer who, judging by his nervous glances at the bench, was either a discount attorney or someone she conned into pretending to be one. I didn't recognize him from any local firms. The judge entered, gave a polite nod to the room, and set down a thick folder. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked directly at Deborah. Mrs. Whitmore, I contacted the county zoning office and reviewed their records from the past 20 years. I also spoke with their legal counsel. You are not, in fact, incorporated under county law. Your HOA charter was never finalized. Deborah's pen stopped tapping. That can't be right, she blurted. We've been issuing fines and holding board meetings for over a decade. We have landscaping standards, a community pool, which are all privately funded, I assume, the judge asked. Well, yes, but only because we collect dues collected under the assumption of legal authority you did not possess, he interrupted. Therefore, any enforcement actions taken under the HOA's name have no legal standing. This includes the lawsuit you brought against Mr. Peterson? The man in the gray blazer leaned over and whispered something to Deborah. Her face shifted from denial to panic. The judge turned to me. Mr. Peterson, your countersuit claims damages for harassment, attempted misrepresentation of jurisdiction, and unlawful filing of a civil complaint. You've submitted documentation in support of that claim. Do you wish to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, I do. I handed over a flash drive. There's more. Security footage from my property, dated log of interactions with Mrs. Whitmore, and copies of flyers she distributed around the neighborhood calling my business a public nuisance and urging people to petition for my removal. That's defamation. My business license is valid. My location is zoned for mixed use. I've never received a citation from the county. The judge inserted the flash drive and skimmed through the footage. Deborah stared forward like she was trying to dissociate into the ceiling tiles. In one of the clips, she was seen walking up my driveway, snapping photos of my van without consent, then placing a folded notice under my windshield that read, "Final warning, remove vehicle or face legal action." Another showed her peering through my side gate before quickly retreating when she noticed the camera light. The judge turned back to her. Mrs. Whitmore, trespassing on private property and issuing false legal threats is not only inappropriate, it borders on criminal misrepresentation. I'm forwarding this footage to the county prosecutor's office for review under statutes regarding unauthorized legal enforcement and harassment. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Deborah's pen falling from her hand. Then the judge looked at me again. As for your countersuit, I'm ruling in your favor. Full reimbursement of legal expenses and damages in the amount of $4,000 for time lost, reputational damage, and undue stress. Deborah gasped. You can't be serious. He's a mechanic, not a victim. The judge didn't even flinch. You abused what you thought was power, Mrs. Whitmore. That ends today. As the gavel came down, Deborah's so-called attorney stood up, muttered something about needing to make a call, and walked straight out of the courtroom. She followed, heels clacking like they were trying to leave her behind. I didn't celebrate, not yet. There was still something unfinished. Outside the courthouse, I was approached by a man in a windbreaker holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as an investigator from the county compliance office. We've been getting complaints about Rosemeadow Heights for years, he said. Most never stuck because they claimed legal status. Your case just proved they never had it. He asked if I'd be willing to sit down for an interview, maybe even testify in a broader investigation. I agreed. 2 weeks later, I was called into a meeting with the county attorney's office. They had launched a formal audit into Rosemeadow's HOA activities, everything from financial records to enforcement conduct. Turns out, they had collected over $100,000 in fines from residents over the years, none of which was ever properly reported to the county or subjected to taxation. Worse, Deborah had used HOA funds money collected under the guise of community maintenance to pay for personal expenses. Restaurant bills, boutique clothing, spa services. They even found receipts for a luxury dog grooming service 70 miles away. The prosecutor didn't mince words. "We're looking at potential charges for fraud, tax evasion, and unlawful use of collected funds." I asked if that meant the HOA would be disbanded. "Not exactly," he replied. "Legally, it was never banded to begin with, but yes, their operations will be halted immediately." Word spread fast. By the end of the month, residents of Rosemeadow Heights received certified letters from the county, informing them that their HOA was illegitimate and that no further dues were required. All fines issued in the last 15 years were declared void. Deborah tried to hold a community emergency meeting outside the clubhouse, but only 5 people showed up. One of them asked if she was still going to reimburse the landscaping fines from 2021. She told him to leave. I watched the whole thing from across the street, sipping coffee from the bench outside the hardware store. The best part? A group of Rosemeadow residents came to thank me personally. One of them, a retired teacher named Mrs. Langford, actually hugged me and said, "I've been hoping someone would stop that woman for years." Another guy, Ben, offered to help fix my garage door that had been squeaking for months. We ended up grabbing lunch afterward, and he told me about how Deborah fined him once for having a basketball hoop on his driveway. His kid hadn't played since. "I'm putting it back up," he said. I nodded. "You should." The neighborhood began to change. Without Deborah's iron grip, people started repainting their fences, planting gardens again, and talking to each other. A few families even formed a volunteer group to clean up the local park, something that hadn't been touched in years, because the HOA claimed it was outside their jurisdiction. Then one morning, about a month after the court ruling, a "for sale" sign went up in front of Deborah's house. No one waved when the moving truck arrived. I didn't need to. I just watched from my driveway, tightening a bolt on a client's suspension arm while she loaded her last box into the car and drove away without looking back. The HOA empire she thought she ruled was gone. And all it took was 3 minutes in court, a county record, and a camera in my yard. Funny how the tools I used to fix engines turned out to be the same ones I needed to fix a broken neighborhood. 2 weeks after Deborah vanished from Rosemeadow Heights, things were quieter, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet you only get after a tornado's passed through and everyone's standing in the rubble blinking at the sun. You'd think the residents would be celebrating, but what I saw on people's faces wasn't relief. It was suspicion. Ben came by one afternoon still wearing his work uniform from the water district. He leaned against the hood of my van, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "You hear about the bank statements?" he asked. "No, what about them?" He reached into the pocket of his jacket and handed me a folded printout. One of the former board members, Marta, got into the HOA email account. "You should see where that dues money was really going." I unfolded the paper. It was a spreadsheet, hundreds of entries. Most looked like typical HOA expenses: landscaping, pest control, a few contractor payments. But scattered in between were some very strange entries. "Why is an HOA paying for a charter bus to Atlantic City?" I asked. "Keep going," he said. There it was. 5 separate transfers labeled Community Enrichment Fund, each one for over $5,000, all sent to a personal account under the name Whitmore Civic Consulting LLC. "She paid herself," I said. Ben nodded once. "And not just that. Look at this one." He pointed to a transfer for nearly $20,000 marked as emergency drainage repair. The contractor's name, a company that didn't show up anywhere in the state's business registry. "She made them up," I said. "Fake companies. Fake jobs." That's what it looks like. I felt something tighten in my gut. Deborah hadn't just bullied homeowners about lawn height, she'd been embezzling. For years. And no one caught it because she'd built a paper wall no one ever thought to knock down. "You think the county prosecutor's already seen this?" I asked. Marta said she tried to give it to them. They told her to drop it off at the office. That was a week ago. She hasn't heard back. I didn't like the sound of that. Bureaucracy likes to move at the speed of molasses unless someone puts a fire underneath it. And I was starting to feel like a match. I got in touch with an old friend, Marcus Delaney, who worked financial crimes for the local PD. We weren't close, but we'd played poker together back when I was dating a woman who worked in dispatch. He answered after 2 rings. "Peterson, you still owe me $20. I'll pay you double if you look at a spreadsheet." He paused. "Go on." I told him what we'd found: fake vendors, large transfers, clear conflicts of interest. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. "You have hard copies?" he asked. "I've got more than that. I've got access to the whole HOA archive. Marta gave me the credentials." He whistled low. "All right. Send it. But I'm telling you now, if this is legit, you just stepped into felony territory." That night I scanned everything. Every suspicious payment, every phony invoice, every so-called maintenance project that never happened. I even included a video Marta had taken from her laptop screen, showing Deborah walking her through how to code expenses in QuickBooks using vague, non-flagging language. Apparently, Deborah fancied herself an amateur accountant. Marcus called me the next morning. "Silas, you sitting down?" I was tightening the serpentine belt on a Chevy when he said it. I dropped the wrench. "I am now. We ran her name through the system. Whitmore Civic Consulting LLC. It's not just the HOA. She's been doing this in 2 other neighborhoods. Same scam. Different names." My blood ran cold. "How long?" 7 years, best we can tell. She rotates the board every few years, keeps a couple loyal people, then uses dummy vendors to funnel the money. She's good. Not smart, but experienced. What happens next? I got a warrant in front of a judge as we speak. We're raiding her storage unit and her condo in Riverbend this afternoon. I'll let you know what we find. By sundown, I had a voicemail from Marcus. "You're not going to believe this. We found 6 boxes of HOA records, 3 burner phones, 2 laptops, and a ledger with handwritten notes linking her to over $100,000 in misappropriated funds. We also found tax documents under a fake name. She's been filing income under an alias to avoid reporting the HOA funds she was embezzling. This just got federal, Silas. The FBI was called in within 48 hours. Apparently, crossing state lines with misreported income and using falsified tax IDs triggers a whole new level of legal fury. I didn't hear from Deborah again, but I did see her on the 6 o'clock news. She was being walked out of her condo in handcuffs, her hair a mess, lips pressed tight, flanked by 2 agents in windbreakers. The anchor called it one of the most elaborate small-scale embezzlement schemes in recent county history. Marta testified before a grand jury. So did 3 other former board members who had no idea what was happening under their noses. I was called in as a witness 6 weeks later, along with Ben and a few others who'd been fined or harassed by Deborah, or more accurately, extorted. The federal prosecutor laid it out clearly. Wire fraud, tax evasion, falsifying financial records, mail fraud, and conspiracy. The maximum sentence: 30 years. Deborah pled not guilty. Of course she did. But once they pulled up her emails, the ones where she instructed Marta to keep the language vague and don't worry about the actual job, just mark it complete, her attorney started looking for a plea deal. By the time summer rolled around, the plea agreement was finalized. 10 years in federal prison, restitution to be determined, and a lifetime ban from holding any fiduciary position in any homeowners association, civic council, or nonprofit. The county appointed a temporary oversight committee for Rosemeadow Heights. Marta was placed on it, along with Ben and a retired judge who lived on the corner lot. Their first act, returning improperly collected fines. Their second, dissolving the HOA entirely. Without Deborah's iron claw, the place turned into a real neighborhood. People had cookouts. Kids biked freely again. The basketball hoop stayed up. One afternoon, Ben and I were sitting on folding chairs outside my garage, eating sandwiches from the deli up on 32nd. He looked at the newly painted mural someone had added to the park wall: bright colors, birds, trees, a quote from some local poet. "This place used to feel like a prison," he said. "Now it just feels like home." I nodded, then reached into my cooler and handed him a soda. "Funny what happens when you kick the warden out," I said. He laughed, not the quiet kind. The real kind that comes from somewhere deep. We didn't talk about Deborah again. There wasn't any need. Her story was printed in 3 local papers and picked up by a regional podcast that specialized in civic corruption. She became a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when someone mistakes a clipboard for a crown, and me. I kept fixing cars. But every once in a while, someone would bring their truck in, lean on the workbench, and say something like, "You're the guy who ended that crooked HOA, right?" I'd shrug. "Just a guy with a camera and a copy of the county charter." But truth be told, it wasn't me alone. It was everyone who stopped being afraid. Everyone who decided their home wasn't just some square on a map that someone else could rule. It belonged to them. To us. And that, more than anything, was the one thing Deborah never understood. Power doesn't come from a title. It comes from people finally saying, "Enough." 3 months after Deborah was sentenced, the neighborhood association meetings were held under open skies at the community picnic area, no longer behind locked clubhouse doors. The folding tables were mismatched, the chairs squeaked, and nobody wore a name tag. But for the first time in years, people actually attended voluntarily. That afternoon, I was helping Ben install a new brake booster in his Dodge Ram when he mentioned something strange. "You know that old guy on Willow Knoll?" he asked, tightening a bolt with a slow, deliberate twist. "Mr. Travers?" "Yeah, he used to sell tomatoes out of his backyard. What about him?" Ben leaned back, wiped his hands with a rag, and looked at me. "He got a notice last week, certified mail. Said he owed back dues for previously forgiven violations." I blinked. "Forgiven by who?" "Says it was from the Rosemeadow Restitution Committee." "There is no restitution committee." "Exactly." I dropped the socket wrench into the tray and stood up. "Where's the letter?" Ben reached into his truck and pulled out a photocopy. The letterhead looked official, stamped with a gold embossed logo almost identical to the old HOA seal, except instead of Heights, it said Heritage. It demanded over $900 in backdated compliance penalties, citing landscaping infractions and an unapproved patio cover. The signature at the bottom read, "Acting Administrator, Miles Cornwell." I didn't recognize the name. I called Marta immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "You're calling about the scam letters, aren't you?" she said without preamble. "How many people got them?" 6 so far. "All elderly. All from the western side of the neighborhood. You think someone's trying to revive the HOA under a new name. That's what it looks like. But this time, it's not just about control, it's about money." I asked her to meet me in 30 minutes. When she arrived, she had a folder under her arm and a grim look on her face. "Check this out," she said, handing me a printed spreadsheet. I cross-referenced the names of the people who got the letters with the old HOA records. All 5 had fines reversed after the court ruling. The 6th. Travers, he never even had a violation, which means they're pulling this stuff from thin air. Who's Cornwell? That's the kicker. He's a cousin of Deborah's. He used to do part-time bookkeeping for her when she was running the HOA. I found 2 checks made out to him back in 2017 landscaping audits, but he wasn't licensed for anything. I stared at the letter again. So he's trying to pick up where she left off, but without the legal wrapper this time. No board, no elections. Just a fake name and a P.O. box. I looked closer at the envelope. The return address wasn't even in our zip code. I spent the next few days checking in with the 5 other residents. They all had identical letters, each one printed on thick paper with a gold seal and a request for payment via check or direct deposit. The account listed was at a small credit union 2 counties over. I drove out there on a Saturday and waited in line until I could speak with a branch manager. I told her I was investigating fraudulent use of a business account. She hesitated until I showed her the letter and a copy of the court ruling disbanding the original HOA. She pursed her lips and said, This account was opened under the name Rosemeadow Civic Heritage Trust. The signer is Miles Cornwell. He listed it as a community outreach fund. Has anyone deposited anything? She checked. 3 payments, total of $2,600, all within the past 2 weeks. Can you flag it? I can report it to our fraud division. But you'll want to file a complaint with the state attorney general's office. If he's using this to defraud vulnerable residents, they'll take it seriously. They did. Within 72 hours of my report, the Department of Consumer Protection opened an investigation. I handed over all the letters, the payment receipts from the victims, and Cornwell's last known address, which Marta had dug up from an old invoice. It was a duplex in a neighboring town, listed under a trust name that matched the fake account. 2 plainclothes investigators visited his property the following day. I wasn't there, but Marta's friend, who lived nearby, told us he ran out the back door and tried to hop a fence. Didn't make it. They brought him in on suspicion of wire fraud, elder exploitation, and impersonating a legal entity. When they searched his place, they found a stack of freshly printed envelopes, a laptop with spreadsheet files labeled collection targets, and a typed document titled Reinstatement Plan Phase 2. It included instructions for setting up a fake council, issuing warnings, and backdating violations. One file even listed potential board candidates, none of whom had agreed to participate. The state filed charges within a week. Ben and I testified again, this time in a larger courtroom, with reporters seated in the back. One of the victims, a woman named Ruth who'd lost her husband the year before, broke down on the stand describing how she'd sent the money because she didn't want trouble. Cornwell's attorney tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding, a community revitalization effort gone wrong. But the jury didn't buy it, not with the mountain of evidence. He was found guilty on all counts. The judge handed down a sentence of 7 years, plus mandatory restitution to every resident he'd targeted. His assets were seized, including the account he'd used for deposits. After the sentencing, the state attorney approached me in the hallway. "You've got a knack for catching these HOA grifters," he said. I chuckled. "I'd rather stick to brake pads and alternators if it's all the same to you." He extended a card anyway. "In case anything else comes up." I didn't think it would, but I kept the card. We didn't hold a celebration, no banners or cookouts, just a quiet sense of relief that washed over the neighborhood like a spring rain. People waved more, mowed each other's lawns when someone was sick. Someone even painted a mural on the back of the old utility shed, just handprints in different colors, with the words "No Kings, Only Neighbors" underneath. One morning, I was replacing a timing chain when Ruth walked up with a Tupperware full of lemon bars. "You know," she said, setting it down, "this is the first time in years I've felt like I live somewhere safe." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and handed her back the empty container from last week. Then she added, "You should run for city council." I laughed. Hard. "I fix cars, Ruth. And you fix neighborhoods, apparently." I didn't give it much thought at first, but a month later the city posted a notice about an open seat in our district. The incumbent had resigned due to health. The deadline to file, 3 days away. I filled out the paperwork that night, not because I wanted power, but because I'd learned what happens when the wrong people get hold of it. And I figured maybe it was time someone who knew the value of a socket wrench and a handshake sat at the table. Whether I win or not doesn't matter. What matters is this: no one sends fake fines anymore. No one patrols the neighborhood with a clipboard and a superiority complex. The paint on the fences is whatever color the owners want. The basketball hoop has a fresh net. The tomatoes in Mr. Travers' yard are back in full bloom. And the only letters people get now, birthday cards.